Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Venture Out event with aCLIMAtar, Navigating the Innovation Ecosystem. In today's webinar, we will learn about the alliance-led technology at aCLIMAtar and through their experience, explore what unique factors scientific innovations like those of CGIAR encounter when trying to scale. What mechanisms are needed to support CGIAR scientists and their partners to bridge this science market gap? This event is part of the Venture Out series, a program of interactive webinars where innovators, including leading startups, ventures, and tech transfer experts, showcase their success stories of bridging ideas from the lab to the market. Venture Out is organized by the CGIAR Accelerator for Impact platform, the venture space that leverages CGIAR's legacy in research and innovation to co-design, accelerate, and de-risk the development and deployment of science-based solutions for sustainable agriculture and climate action. Through these events, we're seeking to encourage learning and connection amongst innovators, highlight some synergies and pathways for value creation with CGIAR research, and further inspire the entrepreneurial mindset and market-oriented approach among CGIAR scientists. So today, we're joined by two alliance scientists behind aCLIMAtar, Christian Bunn and Paul Schmidt. aCLIMAtar is a platform that provides site-specific climate change risk assessments with corresponding portfolios of priority adaptation practices for cocoa, coffee, and tea producers in West and East Africa and Latin America. The platform combines climate analysis with local adaptation knowledge and generates reports with prioritized action options for users. Following a presentation from them on the history and development of the tool, we'll be joined by a venturing expert, Julian Jantke from Accelerator, to engage in a dialogue with your questions. So that said, I encourage you to please take full advantage to participate in the discussion by using the Zoom Q&A function to share your questions, reflections, and requests for our speakers. Now, without further ado, I'll hand things over to Christian and Paul for a presentation on aCLIMAtar and their experience developing and scaling the technology. Welcome.
Thank you, Megan. I'll start screen sharing. Please let me know once it's visible. Here we go. Start presentation. It's visible. Great. Hello, everybody. Also from my side, I'm Paul Schmidt. Together with Christian Bunn, we worked on aCLIMAtar and developed it. Today's presentation will be structured into three parts, kind of as Megan already mentioned. We first give some background information about aCLIMAtar, diving more into detail how the platform works, to then, based on the challenges that we've encountered throughout the development process, lead over into the discussion together with Julian. aCLIMAtar is meant to be a global platform for climate adaptation in coffee, cocoa, and tea. The initial version of the platform started off in Central America on coffee and cocoa, and we then expanded to Africa to cover cocoa in West Africa and coffee and tea in East Africa, and are now going back to South America to also cover cocoa there. The platform in itself links climate data with climate adaptation advice and is meant as a tool for extensionists, but also with relevant for the management level regarding planning, and covering the need for information on site-specific climate data, but link that directly to actionable advice on what can be done to mitigate the climate risk and adapt to climate change, whilst also facilitating a differentiated adaptation approach to develop a supporting environment for adaptation. The platform is available in 3 languages, in English, Spanish, and French. How does it work? On entering the platform, you will you're first asked to select your crop and your location to obtain then the location-specific climate data. You can either choose a map selection based on a district level, or upload also GPS point data for the climate data. You will be provided with information on past current and future climate, projected climate for mid-century, regarding temperature, precipitation, but also the specific hazards that you have to face regarding crop risk and also human heat risk for workers on the farm or the operators themselves. The platform differentiates by the severity of change. So we take a differentiated adaptation approach where we have incremental, systemic, and transformational adaptation. And regarding the degree of change that is expected for the location, we differentiate the adaptation advice that we're giving, combining thereby a strategic advice on how do you have to focus your adaptation journey, and then also provide directly practice options. In the last part of the process, where you will be guided when entering the platform, you'll see the different practices that we suggest that are pre-filtered from a long list of adaptation practices that have been co-developed with the local actors in those different countries, together with strategic advice on how to implement them and how to focus on adaptation. The tool in itself is a tool to inform action and as an input tool for further discussion and to make a concrete start on a climate adaptation journey. It can be used at different points throughout this adaptation journey, from raising initial awareness of climate change and linking to the perceptions of the farmers in the field, and by looking back, looking to the present, and looking towards the future, whilst also to have a more specific analysis of the direction of change that is to be expected, regarding, on the one hand, the specific hazards that might become more severe towards the future, as also the differences in agroclimatic zones, how they might shift, and overall the impact gradient that you have to expect. Last but not least, the practices are not to be read as a blueprint, but rather as the input for the discussion with farmers, with the extensionists themselves, and then also at the management level to identify ways how a supportive environment for the adaptation can be created. On developing the platform, we drew up a support environment because on integration or on the interaction with the platform and with users, we noticed there are complementary steps that are needed. We have an online tutorial available for the platform that explains the basics of the navigation. Have a learning course that provides basic information on climate adaptation, and at the same time how the platform and the different elements of the platform can be integrated in the adaptation work of the extensionists, and then even developed concrete templates for how such workshops could be facilitated when reaching out to farmers and either working specifically on climate adaptation in the different cropping systems, or integrating climate adaptation as a transversal element when giving workshops, for example, on integrated pest management or soil fertility management. The platform in itself, apart from being an online platform, you can also download a report in a PDF format to take it to the field. And we also have a login space where users can create an account and then save locations for later access. Additionally, we have an API developed in application program interface that allows to link the data from the platform into further services or applications. I will now hand it over to Christian, who will reflect on the development process and on the challenges that we encountered there.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. My name is Christian Bunn. I work on climate action and coffee and cocoa at the Alliance of Bioversity International and CGIAR. And aCLIMAtar is basically the result of all of the 10 years of research at the Alliance starting all the way back in 2015, 2016, when we started a project on facilitating adaptation in coffee and cocoa value chains. The objective we had back then was to understand how companies work around climate action. The idea is that a lot of people already have outreach activities. We don't have to get to producers ourselves. We use these existing innovation systems, existing extension services, and sort of feed climate information into them so that it gets taken to scale through these existing systems. The first, towards the end of this first phase, the cocoa adaptation platform for Central America was developed together with World Cocoa Foundation and Ricolto. That still exists, sustained by Ricolto, and we then sort of took this over and added coffee as a second crop in Central America. And in this latest iteration of the last 2 years, we had a specific activity really focusing on the aCLIMAtar platform and not treating it as a side product of these other projects, but really focusing on the user experience and scaling it to East and West Africa and collating all the information that we already had. So that's the background. Again, the challenge that we faced in the beginning is that it's very hard to make sense of climate data. There are a ton of data portals out there that provide climate data, but they always require at least some geospatial understanding, some capacity, some understanding of crop agronomy. So there's essentially portals which, or you either get them directly from scientific publications or from data portals, but it's not immediately useful for somebody who's not fully invested in this. And it's not useful for me. I can't tell you directly without a longer translation process what 2 degrees up means for myself and my own livelihood, and less so smallholder producers. So we set out to understand, to try to do this translation process and take this translation process away from the user and make it as explicit as possible. So this means that we need to understand the crop, we need to understand climate information, and we need to understand adaptation options. And what we do then is to focus on long-term climate change. That always needs to be emphasized. We look at the at long-term climate change, a 20 to 30-year time horizon, which usually implies strategic decisions. Decisions such as staying in, moving out of cocoa, coffee, tea, or staying in or intensifying, and understanding which practices could be used. Because again, just because you understand where you're headed doesn't necessarily mean you also understand what you can do about it. And it was key to understand. Next one, Paul. It was key to understand the knowledge system that we wanted to exploit for scaling, and I think it was very key crucial in the beginning of this journey to understand that we're talking with a very specific, that these companies are not driven by the sustainability objectives as they claim them to be, right? They have long-term supply objectives and they have reputational risks, and these are the reasons that really drive their investments in sustainability and also climate action in coffee and cocoa. So these are this was a very important learning process. We conducted all these interviews, and it was important because as researchers we often think that what we do is extremely relevant to the outside world, but it's important to understand who we're talking to and what motivates them to hopefully implement some of the things that we come up with. Next one, please. And so then that was the motivation to come up with some of these solutions, trying to make it as easy as possible. And at first we thought our usual training materials that can still be downloaded would be the way to go. So these were training guides for Rainforest Alliance developed together with them, or the Cocoa Link app, which was co-developed with Hershey's, and they used some of our material for this app. But all of these pathways were very limited in their reach. The reports still required reading. It was not possible to directly link a location with solutions. And the apps were meant to be farmer-facing, but really uptake was very, very low. So that's where we were, and that's when we came up with aCLIMAtar as a sort of a middle ground, where we translate these training materials into something interactive. And maybe I should have put a different another summary slide here, but you've seen the aCLIMAtar tool, the way it plays out at the moment. It's meant to be a training platform, a support platform, so that it can really aligns with the way Rainforest Alliance works on the ground. Now, the challenges we face at the moment, the first one is funding. So what we see is that donors like to pay for new tools. And just this week, we received feedback on a concept note, which stated, please make it clear that you're building a new platform and it's not the same, when actually what we were suggesting is to add a module to aCLIMAtar, because but they want a new tool. We want a new module within aCLIMAtar, because that's just way more efficient for everyone. It reduces maintenance cost. It doesn't mean we need to come up with a second instance, a copy of aCLIMAtar, but they sort of want, when they pay for it, they want some kind of ownership and visibility. They don't want to be one donor among others. So they don't want to pay for improvements, pay for maintenance. They really want new tools. And when new tools create costs for us and problems. So better, but at the same time, you know, we need to get users. So there is this first challenge, being us donor-driven, can easily result in us creating a ton of different tools without ever thinking about users. And we think that by focusing on a single tool, we can actually get users. But for donors, getting users is often an afterthought. At least the donors that we're talking to, they're usually an afterthought. It's about creating a tool, and they believe it will live just by the merits of it. But in reality, the users that we're looking at often lack the knowledge to evaluate the tool, so that it really depends a lot on trust. And that building trust requires presence, personal engagement, and promotion, even over long time periods. It means that you talk to potential users and the organizations frequently and keep showing up and keep talking about it, so that they build trust and that you're not perceived as an outsider. But these activities are rarely funded explicitly, and we do them sort of as a strategic side project whenever we go to conferences, for example. Now, the problem with users is that they lead to costs. We should really be analyzing them, understand the user experience, and respond to their feedback, and conduct the proper maintenance, and if we get more users, we also need bigger capacity computing in terms of computing power. So again, this leads to the problem that users are actually a problem with if they're not clients. So clients would be better. Clients in theory can pay for the service, and they're invested, so they contribute. They don't just use for free, but they really want to interact. And we can also, for us, it's better to understand because we get direct and clear feedback about the user needs. But as an institution, we can't charge for use. We can only charge for services, which means we need to make the services we offer directly related to the staff costs that we incur, and conduct these services against deliverables. So these service contracts end up requiring as much planning as grants, but it would usually result in much lower contributions to overall funding. And a recent example of a conversation we had was that an example here, we're using a different definition of regenerative agriculture than you do, but I'll be back in touch as I really feel it would be useful to raise awareness within our company about the aCLIMAtar tool and how we might be able to incorporate some of the guidance in our farmer trainings. So again, this was an email, but with more of a client type of need. So this person would actually be interested in using the tool mostly as it is, but would like to have some revision of the content. Finally, and this is then the challenge, this distracts from science. So the more user focus or client focus we develop, the more distracted we get from science, which is actually our unique selling point. We are selling a science-based tool, which makes it interesting and relevant. But by building the tool, we actually get distracted from better science. So there's a trade-off between being responsive to demand and user feedback versus responding to perhaps donors who would actually pay for better science. And finally, scientific advance does not equal decision support advance, which is something we constantly have to explain, especially when, for example, the questions come up like, are you using the latest climate data? Which resolution are you using? And or are you using seasonal forecasts and calendars and so forth? So there's a trade-off between the tool and our core work. So we hope that eventually there will be a dedicated institutional service similar to the offerings such as CG Space or gene banks, which are infrastructure within our institution that help to maintain live tools, maintain users, and take the burden of us for financing smaller maintenance costs, server costs, and so forth. We believe it's very important to develop long-term partnerships with users and clients, which are also capable of maintaining these tools, and hopefully we can get to revenue sharing models with startup clients, which actually take over the tools for us, while we ourselves maintain some ownership over and decision making over the content, so that we can focus back on developing new content, new science, which should be our core strengths, rather than offering a service for free that really distracts us from what we require to remain relevant. So that's it from our side. So yeah, last question we always get is this free? Is this really free? And yes, it is, but it also has downsides. There are some links here. I believe the PowerPoint will be shared afterwards, so I've already seen questions in the chat asking where you can access the tool. The tool is online under adaptation.aclimatar.org. And you can also access the tutorials, the learning course, the workshop templates there, and the technical documentation. Thank you for your attention, and we are now going back to Megan to guide us through the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian and Paul. That was a great look into the history of the development of aCLIMAtar and also all of the challenges you faced along the way, but just how these challenges can be opportunities for the next steps. So I'm sure our audience has a great deal to contribute back to the discussion. We're already getting some questions. So now is your time to bring your comments and questions to the panelists through the Zoom Q&A function. And while you begin to pop these in, I'll introduce our next panelist joining us here. This is Julian Jantke of Accelerator. Julian has extensive entrepreneurial expertise through previously running and successfully exiting several innovative social enterprises and for-profit ventures. And Julian, perhaps you can kick off the dialogue for us by sharing your initial reflections on this presentation. Do you see any aspects of your own work accelerating ventures reflected in this experience of aCLIMAtar?
Yeah, hi Megan, hi everyone. Thanks for the presentation. I think it's really good, and I think it reminds me a lot of the sort of, I guess, projects we are seeing as well, and sort of we are supporting. And I think not only the challenges within the projects and the ventures, but also, I guess, the brains behind it, the academics that, you know, constantly struggle to sort of, you know, want to do really good science, but at the same time want to do impact, not only want a publishing paper, but like sustaining and scaling the impact. And how do you straddle that line? I think is really good. And I feel it also came out in the talk, right? For Paul and Christian to really say, you know, we want to do great stuff. We want to scale it, the impact, but at the same time, you know, we don't want to sort of jeopardize, I guess, also credibility of the product, which is in the science. And, you know, and there should be commercial partners in a way that, you know, should then take it forward and work with us in partnership. And I think this is something we see quite a lot, and I think it's quite important. And I think coming to that realization as a researcher, you can't do everything by yourself. Like, you need partners and you need to venture out. And, you know, I think it's quite important. Yeah. No, I thought it was great. I really liked it.
Fantastic. That's a great first reflection. And absolutely, I agree. I think there's this sort of need to straddle the line between a lot of different aspects of science and market. So having these conversations where we can bring in all these perspectives is very important. I'll call in a question here from the chat. This is asking about how intellectual property is involved. How can we sort of make those considerations to protect IP while still trying to scale out these innovations for public good?
Well, that's one of the big questions we have ourselves, and this is one yet another example of how building these tools is, on the one hand, really required, and on the other hand, distracts us from what we really should be good at from science. So the tool as it is doesn't include anything that is proprietary. All the data was already out there. It was just that people told us, without a degree in geography, I can't use this data. We had users. I mean, all of this is basically also an attempt for us to make our life easier, because people approach us, can I have this data? And then we never see it again. We don't know what's happening to it. And and they're asking, can I have your reports? Can you explain me your reports? And so the tool itself is also the result of me being tired of explaining the same thing all over again, and trying to put it into one platform and have the text there, and have somewhere to send people. So I don't know in what extent that then means we have something that could be protected by IP rights, but in principle, we don't really claim much ownership over it, other than citing us and acknowledging where you got the information.
Yeah, it's very interesting and you know, a challenge that I think a lot of innovations that come from this research context and this academic context face. Julian, do you see this as a common challenge for accelerating ventures coming from that context?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's really interesting because, yeah, I mean, you can see right on the face of it, from an IP point of view, you might have some copyright in source code and stuff, there's maybe a little bit around the data. But I think that is, I think that is not the unique bit of it. I think essentially what Christian said is like they found a unique way to make something really complex, really accessible for loads of people. And I think that's the first challenge in translation. And then is really thinking about, okay, as he said, like we want to give it into the hands of lots of users who can benefit from it. But then the question remains, who pays for it, right? Who basically makes sure that this thing becomes sustainable and scales the impact? And because we can't do it. And I think that is sort of at the heart of it, where I think, maybe like, people now listening in really thinking, okay, I have the same challenge, like lots of investors told me like there's no IP and I can't do it and stuff. I don't think it's right. I think if you come up with something that's really novel, really good, totally user-centric, generates value for the user, and benefits the users or benefits even other people that are not the users necessarily, but, just benefits lots of people, I think you will find people that are willing to pay. I mean, already when I heard the presentation, already like 10 different customer groups came to mind, and started like, have you spoken with Starbucks, right? Like stuff like that, where it's like, they buy a lot of coffee, and they are very much shareholder driven company, but at the same time, they could, for example, fund that tool probably, if they find real value for it that saves them millions, they might say, here's lots of money that you then can use to have it for free for lots of other people and stuff like that. I think this is sort of almost a complex thing, and I feel sometimes with like researchers, it's hard to sort of, go down that route where you say, okay, we need to do commercial activities, but it's not really selling out, or it's not like doing something bad. It's just like saying, we need to generate funds that help us to do all this amazing impact, sustaining it and scaling it. And, it's not about like, being super hardcore commercial, like what I think Paul and Christian said, right? Like it is straddling a really good line where you have, the values of the organization, the values of the researchers, and, combining that and just do commercial operations, totally controlled also by the organization. So it's in line with, the customers you want to have, the deals you want to do, like, it's not like you're selling out or something, it's just like you generate commercial value that then, can come back. And also, I guess, new partners that you can plan for new research funding is not just, only a one-way street, stuff should also come back, I guess, to you guys. And yeah.
Well, this is one of the examples of the one of the quotes is from a company of similar size to Starbucks. And well, they would expect some kind of personalization of the content for their money, and this is where it's hard to fully assess the trade-off between like keeping it as it is, because it was a science-based process to get there. It was publicly all documented with Rainforest Alliance, USAID funding. And then on the other hand, this company saying, we have a slightly different definition and we already have training manuals. This is a great tool, but it should work directly align with our training manuals. Rainforest Alliance paid for some of this, so we used Rainforest Alliance training manuals as input. The company would need slightly different ones. And then it's hard to negotiate input funds that are sufficient to be worth the effort for this kind of personalization, because we have all the baggage and need to do science on this side. If it's just about, so it's we're talking 20, 30,000 sometimes, but there's a lot of money. At the same time, it distracts.
Maybe if I can jump in there, I think that's a really important point also because, as Christian mentioned, we started off from making reports just kind of more interactive and online available. But then normally as a user, you're so used to having really like something beautiful, something that's where you're reactive and responsive to what the bugs that you might find, that's aggressively marketed and positioned and getting out there to you. And I mean, that's not really linked to what we would do as research. I mean, user research, yes, that's an emerging topic and an important topic also within CGIAR, but then that's also a lot of operational things that if we partner with the company, we get rid of a lot of those things, because then the company would be responsible to push for it. But if the collaboration with the company is kind of the same complex process and agreeing and positioning the money within the organization, like if you're having a large research grant, that's just like a difficult relationship between effort and paying off. Because I think it's, yes, the one of the questions in the Q&A, okay, can we reinvest what's done in those development or spin-offs that we're doing from the platform to do more research? That would be ideally it. But then you would need an operational team who takes care of those more basic and spin-off tasks, and would need to have staffed it at the same time to then cross-finance your research, and that's getting complex there.
And we've seen it. Like, I think some organizations can do that, but I think generally there is a reason why research organizations do research and then commercial entities do commercial things. I think it's really good how you guys do it, and that you now think about the next step, where it's like, you know, how do we get it out? How do we scale this up, not compromising, finding the right partners? And I generally would say to researchers, and also to you guys, if you do this sort of things, I think it's quite hard giving it all off, writing a license with a company and say, hey, here's all our IP, you guys go and do everything. I think you're the visionaries behind it. You understand the science. I think they want you. I think also researchers, funny enough, sometimes underestimate the value of their credibility in sales. Like, you know, I think people will place like companies that then can use this product to sell to even larger companies. Larger companies will buy your product over other products, not only because it's a better product, but it comes with a reputation of like world-leading researchers with a world-leading organization behind them. And sometimes it's funny that researchers don't really understand that companies sometimes just buy on this, and you know.
Well, there is an important part of it that it requires engagement. You need to start speaking the language of the companies a little bit in the sector, because some researchers also end up being perceived as an outsider, and that can also happen. Just as I've just recently seen that it was good science, but the way it was framed about more around sustainability, more less tangible impact, and less framed around their business objective, which is why I came back to understanding what the sector, what these companies need, and what the people which are at the conference where you're speaking, who are there, probably need to respond to in one form or another. And yeah, that is very important point to be able to do that.
Yeah, the research is better when we are following up on what's done with the research, and we're learning just so much also. I mean, for us, getting aCLIMAtar out there and also the entire development was also a learning process of, okay, how do the different actors interact with climate data? What is actually what they're interested in? How can we link up to other important parts? Because mainly, for example, the field officers, for them, climate change isn't kind of the most pressing issue. They have the EUDR coming up. They have pest and disease management, they have fertilizer, and then climate change is somehow a more long-term perspective. But it is relevant, and to position the science that is relevant for the users, you need to be engaged with them. But you can't stem the entire engagement of, as you would normally do it as a company, market research, and adjustment and reframing it for all the different use cases. Because we're normally focusing on several use cases that are aligned with what the donor is interested in, what the funder is interested in, but we don't exploit all the opportunities that might be out there.
I'd like to come back to Julian's other point, how hard it is to hand this over. I'd be very hesitant, and I've told this Megan before and Gianpiero. We need to retain ownership over this. Like it becomes baggage, it becomes sunk cost, distraction, but at the same time, it's our ID card. It's our it's how we showcase what we've done before and what we walk around with to attract new funds. So it's a very tricky situation, probably especially in an applied research institute as we are, and I almost feel like it's bad for us to create a finished tool. It's bad because suddenly you have to deal with users and you struggle to explain to donors why you need more money. And unless the users start creating money, which is very hard institutionally, but yeah, you also struggle to explain to the donors what needs to be different, and creating another tool is hard because it really takes time and learnings to do something that is yeah, really responds to real life needs, real world needs.
And it is a good challenge. And I think understanding the difference between a user, beneficiary, and a customer is quite important, because I think once you understand, there might be people that use it, but they can't afford it, but there's someone else that is willing to pay for it. And it could be donors, obviously, but it could be even other organizations, could be governments, but could be also commercial entities, could be insurance companies. I don't know who it is, but I think looking at that to say, okay, how can we have things sustainable? And it could be with a partner, to allow us to sustain it, and then maybe, as you said, like use some of the funds to keep developing it, but also some of the funds to do more research, frankly, in that area. I would be surprised if let's put it this way, if the product will continue, I think in 5 years you will find some really interesting new questions where you do really new research that will lead, I think, to more impact. And that's why I think it's so important, as you said, so that the organization can keep hold of the core IP, the reputation around it, in order to be able then to do more research further down the line and have that strategic control over product and the tool to really say, okay, we want lots of application around it. We want lots of impact. We want to scale that impact. We want to have commercial activities going on that fund that, but at the same time, we want to be in strategic control in order to make sure, we can do more research. We can even partner maybe with, around the world with other partners. I think this is quite important. And I think, again, having both is really important. I think for researchers also to understand, to talk to the organization and say, this is my vision. Can you help me to enact it? And I think legally and commercially, most of these things are possible. I mean, in my experience.
That's a very good point. It actually is also very helpful to position us strategically to also answer follow-up questions. So while maybe this question is answered to a reasonable extent and we could improve on details, there are also major other questions, follow-up questions. Once I have the strategic climate advice resolved, how about doing something like this for other timescales, other crops, and this is really where donors then become attracted by the existing tool, and it positions us strategically as a leader in this field, a knowledge leader, which is very important for us as an organization.
And also going the question in the chat, what about CGIAR's mission to support low-income producers and consumers? I think that's exactly right. What, Christian, you're saying is like, we don't want to give it purely to hand it over to a commercial entity that can do with it whatever we want, because our mission is exactly that. That's why we want to stay in control, so we can do that. And I think both things are not exclusive. I think you can have commercial partners that use it for some section, but then you have, this funds it essentially so that, low-income producers and consumers can use it for free. And that's, I think, the holy grail. Can you achieve that? Enough funds coming in to maintain it and have it free in a way. And I guess same question, next question, when we say, partners, there can be the public sector too. I think there might be even governments that say, this is really interesting. And it's not interesting because we're good people, but it's economically interesting because, we might have better yields that then, lead to better tax incomes or whatever it is. We train our farmers better. I think it's just understanding who could be that customer that then pays so it could be free for the users, for example.
Yeah, that's the kind of relationships we're trying to build. But then again, it's very important to understand this difference between the user and the client and the donor, and navigating and understanding what's possible where. It requires follow-up.
I would be quickly interested to ask, I mean, I know that aCLIMAtar is, developed with partners from Rainforest Alliance, as you mentioned, and surely other partners involved in the scaling as well. How do you think they come into play when we think about this sort of scaling out conversation? Do they have these same reservations or challenges that you face in connecting with private partners, or do you think they could be advantageous to go these sort of commercial route?
Well, my view is always that I really appreciate Rainforest Alliance as a partner because they're not purely driven by private interests. So they're in this between space where they are a private entity in the public interest, and they work in a very similar area that as we do. So they're very open to discussing new solutions. They know that they depend on science, and they're open, and they are committed to the same public sustainability objectives as we are. So they're a great partner organization in this sense that at the same time, they need to respond to these private sector interests and need to have them in mind, so they can also help us focus more on solutions and products and decision support services rather than remaining in this scientific sphere. So for us, I appreciate them as a partner.
I'll call in another question here from the chat. And this talks about on the idea of commercializing the platform, how can that sort of platform be the foundation for additional platforms developed on top of this and building on top of, shared services and offering these to farmers under B2B or B2C? I think the question sort of getting at the idea of a base for developing the tool further.
Julian, do you want to help me out there?
Well, on the one hand, we already are aware of kind of, okay, we build the platform, we build the front end, which is also important to just showcase, well, not only the idea, but kind of showcase what can be done with the data that we have or that we, that we worked with. But we do have this API, for example, because we understand that there are other systems where the data might be even more useful if it's fed in. But we hadn't had the opportunity to explore further down this part. But it's definitely something interesting to see, okay, can we plug in then the users into different things? I think on the one hand, in some way, it's also not so much about falling in love with the interface and the product that you develop, but more on the way that you solve the solution and how this can then be useful in other contexts as well.
I mean, it's part of the reason why we're here. That's why we're here and talk a little bit about what we learned, and we're also vocal about it within, for example, the Excellence in Agronomy initiative, which needs to be acknowledged for funding a great part of the work. And I believe that all initiatives, so all core funding within CGIAR often ends in the development of delivery mechanisms such as tools. And I hope that we can be constructive in this process and also support other teams and leadership scientific leadership don't always understand what's successful and what isn't, and just because a tool is from an agronomy perspective great, doesn't mean it has potential to be actually used. And explaining these things is something we try to be vocal about.
And I think it's a process. Like, I think also we've seen that I think you need trailblazers to really say, okay, we're doing that. It might not be also super popular sometimes within the scientific community doing that, but I think it's important if you don't have the impact in mind. And I think the days where you just write a paper should be over. I think it should really make an impact as well. Could be a policy, you know, something, public engagement, get the public on side. But I think it's such an important thing, the things you're doing, that is really like, okay, how can we sustain and scale the impact from that research? It's so important. And if we make it user-friendly and understandable, great, we've achieved something. If we then can give it into the hands of commercial entities, they make a profit, this funds it so that we can train for free farmers in Africa. I mean, even better. I think this is it. It's like, I think, you know, moving it, shifting it. Like, I think you guys are on the right track. I mean, I love it. Like, I think it's great.
But yeah, I mean,
and it's hard.
I do have this idea that eventually we'll be evaluated against user numbers. So, you know, we have these tools that are developed, and maybe we'll be evaluated against user numbers, just like we have metrics and more classical hectares planted with CGIAR crops. Funds influenced with our decision support tools, or producers reached with our agronomy solutions. And I think that we also need to be aware that tools are not an end. Having active users, that is probably, I mean, that's also short of, we want quality interactions and so forth, but that's really where the research starts, and it's kind of hard to keep track. But we should be ready to be able to report active users.
I think it was a great parallel you drew in your presentation, this idea that we need something like a gene bank, a dedicated institutional service and infrastructure to maintain these tools and the users. So I think that's a great way to think about it, that we're investing in the maintenance and making sure that we have these tools for posterity, and they don't just sit on the shelf and they don't just get written in a paper and left behind. Well, it looks like we're coming almost to the top of the hour, so I would challenge you all. Do you have any final takeaways, asks of the people in attendance, or just some general feedback you think wrapping up this discussion?
I mean, my general thought, Megan, I think what Paul and Christian do is great. And I think they're on the right journey. I think it's a hard journey. I think if other researchers think about like going on that journey, it's not easy. And I think they outlined it, but I think it can be quite rewarding if you really think in the end, you know, and also not only rewarding, I guess, academically, but also in a way, I think financially, in the way of maybe you become a bit more independent from donors and stuff when you can have self-sustaining products that, you know, allow you to do more things in another way. I think it's almost the ultimate goal. I think if you can achieve that as a researcher, that gives you a lot of freedom as well. I know it's like a nice idea, but I think it is actually possible. I think you probably need commercial partners. You need, you know, the organization behind you and everything, and a lot of luck sometimes as well that things align. But I think it is definitely possible, and they're on a great track. I think it's a great example of how a good tool can hopefully do a lot of good impact.
Thanks. I think it was a bit of a struggle in the beginning, as coming from a PhD and having done my research, and suddenly I was supposed to answer real life questions, which I thought, you know, I was really reluctant in the beginning, right? And why go to a coffee fair where it's essentially about, you know, selling coffee and selling coffee machines and yeah, but that's where you understand why people would want your tool, or the London AgTech symposium. Remind me, Megan, what it's called. Like, it's definitely not scientific. It has nothing to do with science, but it teaches you to understand how to talk about the tool, how to present it, and what to mention, what not to mention. And so that in the end, when you promote it and approach a partner, don't come off as an outsider, but perhaps more of an insider, and you know how to talk about and how to relate to the problems they have to deal with.
I think that's a great note, and sort of on the flip side of that same coin, just as we have things to learn from those actors, they have a lot to learn from us, and we can bring science into those spaces, hopefully create that sort of shift. So I'll leave you with that last word. And now I've got to wrap this discussion section up because we're about to the end of the event. But throughout, I think we addressed a number of really unique opportunities and challenges that scientists are facing when navigating the innovation ecosystem through technologies like aCLIMAtar and other innovations developed by CGIAR scientists. So bringing these opportunities into this larger conversation at CGIAR will be very important to understand how our ways of working can empower research outputs to move beyond the conceptual stage toward market viability, where they can generate new value and tangible impact, as you were saying. So I thank you all for being a part of this effort. CGIAR Accelerator for Impact platform continues working together with our collaborators, including the scientists and venturing experts like Accelerator, to advance joint programs that do just that. So please connect with us if you're interested to work together on this front. And stay tuned to our next events by connecting with us on LinkedIn or reaching out at innovations@cgir.org. As mentioned, the presentation will be available. We'll also share the recording of this event. So if you want to keep the momentum going and share with your network, we would really, really appreciate it. And just as a final plug and a little note for those in presence at CGIAR's Science Week in Nairobi in July, we do encourage you to join our side event. That's Monday, July 1st. Around 9:30, really early, kicking off the Science Week with our program from mega program to market, bridging CGIAR science to opportunities in the AgTech innovation ecosystem. We'll tackle some of these similar questions about how to integrate demand-driven research into the new portfolio. So don't miss your chance to contribute to that discussion also. Again, that's Monday, the first day, July 1st. So until then, I want to thank you again for all who have tuned in today, and special thanks, of course, to Christian, Paul, and Julian for sharing their expertise. So thanks, and see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.